This episode of Around the Layout is brought to you by Weather My Trains. Hey, are you like me and the thought of doing a DIY weathering job on an expensive engine leaves you in fear? It's time to call in Rob Arsenault at Weather My Trains. Do what thousands of satisfied customers have done and let Rob help you notch up the realism on your layout with beautifully detailed weathering on your locomotives and rolling stock. To see what Rob can do for you, check out his website at weathermytrains.com. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. My name is Ray Arnott. So glad you could join us. On today's episode, coming to us from Northern Colorado, John Parker. John, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you, Ray. It's great to be here with you. It's
awesome to see you again. Got to see you at the NMRA National Convention in little steamy, little hot Dallas-Fort Worth area.
It sure was. Yes, it was.
It's certainly nice to be back up here in the Northeast. I'm sure you in Northern Colorado getting a little bit of relief from that, but quite a week of activities and whatnot at the NMRA National Convention, and we got to see each other at a few of them at least. So here we talk about our week there. Tell us how you took in the National Convention.
Well, I thought it was a great week. Typically I go with a few friends. We travel to the NMRA conventions every year, and this time nobody from Colorado or the area that I'm in or friends with happened to travel to the convention this year, so I went by myself, which was actually very pleasant. I had the opportunity to meet a lot of people I hadn't met before, such as you and some of the folks from your area.
Right.
And I got to spend some time with you guys from the LDSIG and the OPSIG, and it was just overall, it was just a great experience. So I'm very happy.
Yeah, so it was certainly that, and just a large choice of things to be doing. We got to see each other. I think we ran into each other one time. I don't remember. It was just such a whirlwind of a week and seeing people, but I definitely know we both got to operate Dean Ferris's Oregon Joint Line, which was an absolute blast to do that.
Yeah, I think that's where we probably first met. What a beautiful layout that was. End scale, just a gorgeous layout. I had a great time operating one of the yards, and if I remember correctly, I think you were operating the helper job out of that same yard. So
yeah, that's correct.
You kind of came and went.
That's right.
Yeah. So it was a beautiful layout. And operations at the conventions is always just a highlight. No question about that.
Absolutely. And for Dean's, just very well run. And I'll be honest, I was surprised. First time I've ever operated N scale, I was kind of concerned because of the size and seems like the delicacy of it, but right. That it ran very well.
It sure did. I've operated on a lot of N-scale layouts, and that was one of the better functioning or operating layouts that I've been on in N-scale, and I don't recall having any issues whatsoever. And so it was a real pleasure. Yeah, as an operator, one of the last things we want to do is fight a layout.
That's right.
I didn't experience any of that at all on Dean's layout, so it was a great experience.
Yeah, for sure. So it was exciting to do that. Obviously exciting to meet you in person. We had chatted before. We exchanged stickers because, as I say before, you can't model railroad in 2023 without stickers. So we were able to do that back then. But meet in person, and then we talked about it and got you to agree to come on the show because, boy, oh boy, your layout is something. And I'm just taken back. I've got into the TSG Multimedia YouTube video that's out there. We'll share a link to that, and folks have got to watch that and then, listen to this podcast and then watch that, or vice versa. It's a great companion to the two. John Abacola did an awesome job with that video and sharing that. So I've got a list of questions for you about that layout, but first Sure. I want to get into how you got started in the model railroading hobby. Why don't you tell us how this all started for you?
Sure. Well, I my first recollection was probably when I was 8 or 9 years old. My family, we were living in Minnesota at the time, and we drove to Michigan, where my grandparents live, and my uncle was off to college. So we had brought back a number of things that had belonged to him, And one of those was this just huge brown box that I didn't really know what was in it until I got home. And I opened it up, and there was an HO scale train layout, sectional track, some Matherin equipment, a Rio Grande F7, 5 or 6 freight cars, some Plasticville buildings, and this huge copper-colored transformer with the huge handle and all kinds of bezels and lights, and it was just fascinating for me. So that's my first recollection of model railroading. Also in that box was a replica of a Colt 45, and it was a BB gun, and that started a whole nother hobby. That is probably a good topic for another podcast, but I think my parents still don't know that I had that BB gun when I was 8 years old. But so that was a great trip to Michigan where they lived, and we came back with a lot of great things, including that HO scale model railroad. And I just remember setting that up in the basement on the concrete floor of our home in Minneapolis, and just spending hours and hours, assembling everything and running the train around. And it was just fascinating for me. So that's probably my very first recollection. And then I also, growing up in North Minneapolis, a friend of mine had lived on the Sioux line near, actually his backyard butted up to the Humboldt yard. And we spent a lot of time rail fanning the Sioux line. His backyard was on the west end of the Humboldt yard, and he, we just constantly watched, freight coming in and out of the yard. The drill track was right there for the yard, the arrival track and departure track, and we spent just countless hours watching the prototype during that same time frame when I was, pretty young. So that was my first recollection or experience of prototype rail fanning, if you will. And so the two just kind of joined. I had a 4x8 layout in my basement. I slowly progressed from, getting off the basement concrete floor to a 4x8, section of plywood and the grass mat, and putting the, the sectional track down and the industries, and started to add switches and things like that. So, so that happened probably the following years. And pretty much throughout my high school years, I did just build on top of that 4x8 layout that I had. And then I think I probably followed the path that a lot of model railroaders do, and I took a break at later years in high school and started college and started a family. And so that took a pause. Both prototype railroading, rail fanning, and model railroading took a pause for those years. And early on in my career, I'd say probably this would have been in the early 80s, a colleague had brought in a Walters catalog into the office. Yep. And I had never seen a Walters catalog before. And that's when it was, 3 inches thick and just amazingly full of pictures and great products. And the entire week I just was glued to that Walters catalog. I just couldn't believe it. So I asked him, I said, where did you get this? And he told me about this place in Denver called Caboose Hobbies.
Yep.
And so, of course, I ran down there. I had to get my own copy of the Walters catalog. And that's really what's re-sparked my interest into model railroading. Just, not only the catalog, but being inside of Caboose Hobbies, just looking at the selection of products, meeting the guys working in there and talking to them, finding out what was happening in Denver and Colorado with the model railroad scene, if you will. And so things really took off for me probably in the early to mid 1980s in terms of starting another layout and engaging with the people around me in Colorado that were actually modeling and operating and things like that. So
sounds like a good hobby shop to help you rekindle that model railroad interest.
Yeah, if it wasn't for Caboose, I recall I was making weekly trips for years going down to Caboose Hobbies. Yeah. That was before we really had the internet and ordering from eBay and things like that. And you had to find a good hobby shop, and Caboose Hobbies certainly was a great shop. And as I got to know the guys and started seeing their layouts and operating with them, we just kind of got closer and closer. And whenever I had a chance to, go to Denver for business or I had some free time, I was in the car headed to Caboose Hobbies, and it was just fantastic. So we were very fortunate to have Caboose Hobbies in Denver for the years that we did.
So as this rekindles, we obviously know that you're going to eventually get to this BNSF thing. I'm kind of wondering how that projection happened when you're in the mid 80s and you're seeing the stuff in Caboose Hobbies and you're out in Colorado. What roads are you starting to gain interest in out there? Is there, what's sparking your interest?
Well, primarily the area that I live in, there was a BN secondary main line that went through town. And for a lot of years, as my prototype interest started to rekindle as well, I did a lot of rail fanning along the line. In fact, it was very common for me to grab the kids and my wife, and if I heard something coming on the scanner, we'd jump in the car or the truck and go hang out trackside and watch trains. And of course, a quick trip to the Dairy Queen didn't hurt that either. So, but that really helped. And so we did a lot of rail fanning, not just with my family, but some of the friends and the guys I met that were in the hobby that also lived close by. We just kind of shared this common interest in the Burlington Northern. Mm-hmm. And so that really sparked my modeling as well. So when we bought a home in the early 80s with my kids and my wife, it had a large unfinished basement. And that's when I started another layout. And it wasn't very big. It was probably, I'd say a couple, 200-300 square feet, maybe, along the wall. And I modeled Burlington Northern because that's what, was close. And that's what I enjoyed. And that really kind of started my layout progression, if you will, that small layout. And over the years, as I became dissatisfied and I learned more about the hobby and I grew my skill base and knowledge and interest expanded, of course, that layout came down and I built a larger layout in the same space. Again, Burlington Northern. And things just kind of progressed. I think I probably went through 2 or 3, maybe even 4 iterations of layouts in that same space.
Wow.
And when I would tell my wife that I'm, taking the layout down, she, of course, was concerned and thought I was going to leave her. Who would take that great layout down? Well, she didn't understand about, not being satisfied with what you have and building more. So, and that's pretty much, that led up to the layout that I have now. So as you're going from layout to layout, what are some of the things that are inspiring you to get bigger? You talked about this group of people that you're starting to meet through Caboose Hobbies and the networking that you're doing. What are some of the things that were inspiring you to make those big changes? Well, certainly, I learned about Caboose Hobbies. I also learned about the Model Railroader magazine, mm-hmm. and of course. In the mid 80s, subscribing to that, just mesmerized by the layouts in there, Utah Belt, Tony Custer's layout, Alan McClellan, David Barrow and the Cat Mountain, and those linear operating railroads, really influenced me as I learned so much more about not only model railroading and modeling, but operations as well. And what type of a layout you needed to have a successful operating model railroad. Right. So my earlier layouts were pretty much, rail fan based, run trains around. There was some switching and so forth. But so those layouts in the magazines, the trade magazines, were pretty influential. Alan Keller had a series of videos called Great Model Railroads. Mm-hmm. Again, this is pre-internet for YouTube and everything else. Right. And so, of course, I was glued to those. I couldn't wait for those videos to come out. And, of course, Caboose carried those. Yep. So I purchased a lot of those videos as soon as they came out. Those were pretty influential as well. Those were great videos highlighting, the big names, the great railroads, and also had a lot of modeling tips and hints and projects as well. So those were pretty influential. And the people at Caboose, were also very influential. I know there was one guy that lived in the same neighborhood as me. His name was Doug Geiger. And Doug was a prolific modeler. He just loved operations, and he has a great layout called the Granite Mountain Railway. And he, again, he was just a few blocks from me, and I didn't know that. And when I did know it, I finally got the courage up to ask him if I could come over and participate in an operating session. Yeah. And I told him I just want to observe. And he said, absolutely not. You're going to come over and operate. Stuck a throttle in my hand. And boy, it was so intimidating, walking into the house, and there's 15, experienced operators there. And this is in the 80s when not too many people were, I should say early 90s, when not too many people were really operating. And it really wasn't as big of a hobby within the hobby as it is now. So it was very intimidating. But I did well and hung in there, and I still operated tugs. And so he was a real big influence in terms of my desire to operate.
Wow. Okay.
So, yeah. And then when I started to travel and locally, I shouldn't say locally, but even within, an 8-hour drive of Denver, I traveled to, for example, Utah, operated Lee Nicholas's layout and some fantastic layouts in Utah. And those were pretty influential too. And that's when the, bug just bit me. And as that happened, I was becoming more and more dissatisfied with my layout because I wanted to replicate what they were doing and have the same experience, and I wanted others to have the same experience on my layout.
Right.
So take it down, start over again, and that's pretty much how I came to have 3 or 4 different layouts in the same space until about 2005 and 6 when we decided that it was time to move, build a new home with the large basement, and design and build. I like to call it my lifetime layout, and it's been 15 or 16 years now, so it certainly is going to be with me for a while. But that's kind of what started the BNSF Fall River Division.
You kind of hit on something I've talked about maybe in other podcasts, and I've certainly had these conversations offline with friends and whatnot about, the layout now doesn't have to be the lifetime layout, and you've kind of progressed through that, and you've taken lessons through layout 1, 2, 3, and so on. Sometimes I think at least some folks, when they start to build, they start to feel like, the one and done, like I got to build the layout now. And really you can do that. You can build a layout that's good for now, or maybe the next 5 years. And then there's a progression. Okay, then, I'll have this layout for 5 years. I'll hone my skills on it. I'll try some things. I'll do and then I can go to the next layout and then take those lessons. And then, like you said, that what you're absorbing, your mental notebook, going to layout and operating them and learning things and bringing it back. It doesn't have to be, again, one and done. It can be a progression like you've done here.
Sure. And I think that as layout owners and builders, we have to not be afraid to make changes when we see that.
Right.
Last thing we want is our layouts to become lame ducks and just, we end up becoming totally dissatisfied and we do nothing with it. So we've got to, jump in and make changes when we're not satisfied. It's not a good idea to dwell on those things that we're not happy with.
Right.
And I just hate to see any layout become a lame duck and just sit vacant and not get any focus or attention. I think we need to progress forward, and that's the best way to do it, is just to jump in and do something different if you're not satisfied.
Yeah, that's. I think some of us, we get hung up. I'm in that kind of thing with my layout, and trying to figure out what the next step forward is for me. And I think part of the other problem too is that sometimes we become our own worst critic. I say something, and then other operators are saying, "You're crazy. You don't know what you're talking about. It's fine." Like I think that we want to continuously improve and try to make it better. But that can be a process. Again, it doesn't have to be on, the layout that you have now. It doesn't have to be the end all be all. It can progress and move forward. And seemingly you taking all those lessons from operating and applying it has really paid dividends for you.
Yeah. And, learning and improving our skills and knowledge is a lifetime journey. Yeah. And we're always doing that. I'm always doing that. I'm always making changes to this existing layout. One of the great benefits I'm able to do is to travel around the country and see other layouts and operate on other layouts. And I'll get a great idea and bring it back. And I'm not afraid to take out a section of the layout and do something different. But that's never going to change. It's just always going to happen. And I think we all need to understand that and accept it and move forward. So,
yeah. And again, that great clue in there of the more layouts you see, the more you get to operate, the more you get to be a part of, the better off you become, the more well-rounded. And there's always a takeaway. Every single layout that I went to down in Texas was a takeaway.
Sure.
And that, there was a lot of positive. There was some negative too. Like, I would not do this, or I'm not a fan of this, but there's also a ton of, holy mackerel, I got to write that idea down. That's amazing. Or take pictures. Of course, now we don't have to write anything down. You take the cell phone out and take a picture of it, and now you've captured it. But yeah, seeing layouts and traveling and getting exposure to as many as you can is really great advice to any model railroader.
Yeah, and especially with not only traveling and seeing layouts, but with social media and YouTube, we're able to experience that now. I mean, that wasn't the case 20 years ago. And, we had magazines that helped quite a bit.
Right.
But anything that we can do, any opportunity to enhance our own education and skill and knowledge in NMRA is a perfect example of that. And that's why I continue to go. I still learn things from the clinics and seeing layouts. And I went to a fantastic clinic, attended with Bernard Helen from Mini Prints. On figure painting. I picked up a lot of great tips, even though I'd painted figures and I thought I was doing okay. I'm really eager to get started on learning some of those new skills I learned in this clinic. So it's just a nonstop process, the learning and enhancing and bringing that back to your layout. It's just nonstop.
Get ready for the next time Bernard does one, because he called it finger painting, then figure painting. And I think next time he's Canadian, so maybe figure skating. So that may be the next clinic that he runs. But yeah, Bernard's a lot of fun and certainly a lot to learn, like you said, from these NMRA clinics and getting to the exposure of these great people.
Yes.
So let's get back to 2005, 2006. You've moved, you've gone into this new home. Is it a home that you was it something that you purchased, or was it something that you designed with a model railroad kind of in the back of your mind?
Yeah, I certainly designed the layout. The home and the basement for the layout. Right. It took over a year to build the home, and every day of that year, I was here on site looking at the basement to make sure the footprint was correct, and I was also developing a layout plan at the same time. Yeah. So, and for example, one of the days I came out, they had put the piping in the basement underneath the floor and totally reversed it. Right. Uh-oh. So I'm fortunate that I was here on site to catch things like that, because that would have really screwed up my layout plan in terms of where they're putting the utilities and things like that in the basement. So, so I took, during that year of construction, I was developing the layout plan and taking it basically week by week and having other people look at it and getting feedback. And I had a great group of guys that were providing me honest, candid feedback, and that really is necessary. Even if they gave me 100 ideas and I only took one, that's one great, better idea than I had, and that was beneficial.
Yeah,
so,
for sure.
Yeah. So I did things like, I knew I wanted a mushroom layout. So talking about influences in the hobby, there were a couple of layout planners out there. John Armstrong had done some multi-level mushroom layout designs that I really just admired very much. And Joe Fugate as well had a large mushroom layout, and he had published a couple of articles in the late 90s, I think 1997 in Model Railroader. So I've got all those issues. That was part of my research, and part of my desire was the mushroom concept, so that I had more space, more running length, and so forth. That contributed to my meeting my overall goals. But in order to construct the mushroom, I needed another foot in the basement. So when I built the home, I had another 14 inches added so that I had that height, and I could add a raised floor for the mushroom. So there's some unique things. Yeah, some unique things that I did to the house to support the layout. No question about that.
As I say, you definitely need a little bit deeper basement to get a mushroom in there. Let's talk about mushroom, because honestly, for me, I've got my good friend Joe Mammy talks about a mushroom layout, and he was talking about building one. He was telling me, and I struggled so hard to get my head wrapped around, like, okay, so I couldn't do it. I was like, I got to physically see one. Did you ever get to go to a mushroom layout and kind of get that like tangible thing where you got to see a mushroom layout in action beforehand?
I did. I went to Joe Fugate's Siskiyou line and observed and studied. I was a big study of Joe Fugate's. He not only did he publish articles in MR early on, but he also did a series of videos that talked about the mushroom and the construction and the design. And so I did visit his layout. So I took quite a bit of time to educate myself about the mushroom because it's very difficult to conceptualize.
Yeah.
And what's even more difficult is to communicate that to other people. So when I was building the layout, I had a group of 4 or 5 guys that were helping me initially with the bench work and everything. And it was very difficult for them to understand my vision.
Yeah.
Because they didn't understand mushrooms. So we spent hours together as a group,
right,
watching Joe's videos, looking at, the magazine, the plans and so forth. And as we started building the bench work and seeing, in 3D what was happening with the mushroom, they finally caught on. But it's very difficult. Even today when visitors come downstairs and see the layout, it's hard for them to conceptualize, the design.
Yeah.
And it's okay. It's complex. No doubt.
Well, thank you, because I feel a little better now, because it's wildly difficult to, once I watched this video we talked about earlier, from TSG Multimedia, as you're walking around, I could get it. I was like, okay, but when you look at it on paper, when you look at it 2-dimensional, it's hard because it's very 3D, like you said. And, when
right,
you're looking at it on a 2D plan, it's kind of hard to grasp, but So you experienced that. Here's a takeaway, something you definitely want to build, and they finish the house. Where does the process begin? Let's back up. Let's back up even farther than that, because I'm interested. You talked about Burlington Northern. Why the Fall River Division? Why BNSF? Where did that start to come in?
That started to come in. It's a freelance prototype railroad. So. The locations are freelance. Again, one of my goals, I had many goals before I started this, was to build a freelance railroad because I wanted to model different parts of the country, different scenery, different equipment, and so forth. And if I was sticking to a strict prototype, for example, I wanted to model the High Line, the BNSF High Line up through Montana, I probably wouldn't be able to run certain types of trains, or an auto rack, through train or something like that. And I'd hate to get criticized because, I wasn't following the prototype strictly. So I'm like most model railroaders, where I'm in between the spectrum of strictly prototype and completely freelance. I'm in the middle. So the BNSF is the prototype that I follow in terms of operating practices, equipment, and so forth. But the locations on my layout are freelance. So I chose the freelance prototype option to have some flexibility and model what I wanted to.
Right.
The scenes and the towns. And a lot of that was influenced in a lot of my early days of rail fanning up in the Powder River Basin, western Nebraska, South Dakota, okay, that part of the country. There's a county in South Dakota called Fall River County. Okay. And a lot of those locations where the BNSF runs through, that's where I've selected a lot of the names from. Even though I'm not following strictly the prototype locations, but there's some reference to Fall River County, South Dakota for the most part. I just really enjoy rail fanning up there. Spent a lot of time up in Powder River Basin, Crawford, Nebraska, and that area rail fanning. It's always been a favorite place of mine. In addition to the High Line on the BNSF up through Montana, and so
you've accomplished the ultimate goal of a freelancer. I think it's like the Alan McClellan kind of accomplishment to make people think that it's actually real. Like,
right.
Once you like, I would have thought that the Fall River Division really was a division of the BNSF. So you've done an excellent job. I think that's like the ultimate goal of a freelancer, right? First, have somebody think it's a real railroad and start Googling it and trying to find information on it. So,
and that happens all the time. Prototype railroaders will come down here and ask you, where's the Fall River Division? I've never heard of it. And looks like, Wyoming. And this looks like, the rock work and the snow sheds up on the High Line on the BNSF. And this looks like, so that's very complimentary. Yes.
Yeah. So you got a mix of a whole bunch of great things along the BNSF.
Right.
Choosing a class one's a smart move too. I've talked about that before on the podcast. The more you go into these smaller regional short lines, sometimes the more digging you have to do to get equipment, the more everything. Class 1 BNSF, you've got a plethora of availability to you. That's for sure.
Yeah, especially if you're modeling fairly modern era of the Class 1. But, everybody's got their preference. I mean, some guys just love the short lines and love the history and doing the research. And I'm all for that as well. It's, that's the great thing about this hobby is there's so many choices in terms of what we want to do. And that's one of the great things about it. So a lot of flexibility.
Yeah, for sure. So your travels have influenced you. You've decided on BNSF. You've got this freelance idea of the Fall River Division, and you've got this idea. Talk about the house being finished, and we're heading to the basement to start working. How's that process go?
Well, during the design process, there were a number of goals that I had defined, and I wanted a lot of switching and operations opportunity, but I also wanted the length to be able to rail fan.
Right.
So that necessitated a lot of space, and it was my choice to build a larger layout. And we could get into a big discussion about layout size, but that's my choice, my preference, sure. And I certainly don't regret it. And different sizes of layouts are great for different people based on what your goals and your needs and your availability of resources and so forth are. So I chose a large layout because my goals, that's what supported my goals.
Yeah.
So during that year when we were building it, and I was using a CAD program to lay it out, both levels, I finally solidified the plan. And the first thing I did in the basement was to use masking tape and outline on the basement floor after I sealed it. I should say that I did seal the basement floor first to prevent that dust kick up right from the concrete. So after it was sealed, I put masking tape down to represent the actual bench work and aisle width, just to make sure it all fit in and was consistent with the plan I had developed on CAD.
Right.
And fortunately, I had about 1.5 feet extra in each direction, and worked out perfect. So I had plenty of space. The plan fit well. I had a lot of feedback, a lot of reiterations, and I said, "This is it. We have to, at some point, you have to, put the stake in the ground and settle on a plan." And at that point, I decided that I'm going to need a little bit of help on this. Yeah. And once people understood what I was doing in the project that I had planned, I had a lot of people come and raise their hands and say, "Geez, John, I'll help you out. Need any help?" And probably more people than I imagined and more people than I needed. So I was pretty selective in terms of who I wanted to bring into this project. And there were 4 or 5 guys that were the core group. And we started construction with the bench work. And for the first few years, we were probably working twice a week, 2 work sessions a week. We typically worked Thursday evenings and Saturday mornings for 3 or 4 hours at a time. And the bench work phase went quick. So I was pretty fortunate to have great help, people that knew carpentry work and had the skills. And so that was the first phase, if you will, of the construction of the layout. And a lot of those construction pictures are on my webpage. Under the construction tab. So,
I think you hinted on, we were talking about size of layout and making that decision. And I think, without getting into it too deep, I think you hit on one of the big pieces of that, which is, it takes a village sometimes for a larger layout, to know what you're going to have for a support group and essentially what you're going to have for an operating group too. If you build a big layout and you're kind of a introvert and don't have any real friends and whatnot, it may not be in the cards for you. But if you know that you've got this big supporting cast that you seem to have had, that makes a huge difference in that decision.
It does, and certainly, if you build it, they'll come. That certainly happened. I had to turn people away that wanted to be part of the construction project. I continue to turn people away that want to operate just because I can only have so many people each operating session, even though I try to hold a few slots for new people. Every session, I typically hold 1 or 2 slots for new people, people that want to learn about operations. It's just my contribution to the hobby, if you will. But I still have to turn people away, and I still get questions, how come I can't operate more times than I am? And I try to explain to everybody, I got to spread it around a little bit, but there's a village here, no doubt about that.
Yeah.
And I've been pretty fortunate, and that's just one of the many things that a large layout owner has to have. In addition to having the help in terms of resources, people, you've got to have the financial resources, you got to have the skills, the project management skills. There's a lot of things you need to have to build a large layout, and I think people need to realize that before they just jump in. So it's not for everybody. There's no question about that. But based on your goals, I think people should really take a hard look at, do they have the ability, even though it might be attainable, do they have the ability to pull it off? So
you have this group helping you put the bench work up, and then once you get past the bench work, were there things on the layout that were items that you felt like you had to do, or were these things where you've got these people with some talent and you were kind of okay with? I mean, how did you manage that aspect of it? Of it's your layout. Are they all things that you have to do, or were you able to let go?
I was able to let go some of it. First, probably the most important thing was recognizing where those skills were, who had what skills. Right. So once I recognized that, I was able to make work assignments, and people were also learning along the way too. They were here to, even if they didn't have a skill, they were learning it, putting it into practice and learning it. And to be frank, if they didn't have that skill and they were doing something, I wasn't afraid to tell them, this just doesn't meet the standard or the quality. Let's look at redoing it, or I'll have to redo it myself. And I had an upfront discussion with everybody. Don't take any offense at that. Yeah. It's just the nature of what we're doing, and I believe in having a certain quality level, and they were all okay with that. And I'm sure they learned, and I hope they learned a lot along the way as well. I know they did. So that was positive. We all learned from each other. There were people that had skills. For example, I had one guy who had more carpentry skills than I did, and I took a lot away from his skills. So it was a learning experience on both sides.
I was going to ask that. What skill do you think that you honed the most in this process? Was it carpentry?
No, it wasn't carpentry. Probably electrical, and the design and electrical were probably project management. Yep. I did that for a living for quite a few years, so that helped. Yeah. So there's so many different skills and knowledge bases that we need to have as layout people that construct layouts, I think it's important that we understand where our strengths and our weaknesses are. Right. And so, for example, when I started doing backdrops, I am not an artist, and I had a friend. She came over and did the backdrops for me. I didn't even want to start on trying to paint backdrops because I knew it would take me too long to develop that skill, and I'd rather use that time doing something else in the layout. Yeah. So if I could have her do that or farm something out, I really didn't pay for anything. I didn't hire any professionals to do anything on the layout, but I did have a lot of help through friends and acquaintances. Yeah.
I think there's something neat about that friend aspect. And I've seen a couple other layouts. We've talked to Drew James, who had a great crew out in the Syracuse, New York area, helping him with his layout, and others. And, they've contributed, and I've had contributions on my small layout as well. And I think there's a neat aspect to being able to have people over and be able to tell that story of friendship along with your layout. I mean, sure, it's fun to say, I did, from soup to nuts, I did this entire layout, and that's impressive, but it's also a lot of fun to be able to share those stories of friendship.
Yeah, and they, those guys certainly are friends, and they've taken a lot of pride and ownership in the layout as well, as they should. So it's been beneficial to everybody, and that core group is still with me after, 15, 16 years, and part of their contributions, they also earn seniority. So during an operating session, they get sometimes they get first pick, or they're high on the list, if you will. Yeah. Because of the contributions they've made. So they're also reaping the benefits, if you will.
It certainly builds a different type of operator too, doesn't it? Like you said, that sense of ownership. Now, you certainly won't find that guy leaning on the layout or putting his arms across it so much. If he's the one that had to make the trees, he's definitely not going to be the one knocking them over.
Yeah. And that, not only that, but they've also they haven't been shy or afraid about telling me what doesn't work and what we should be doing differently, or suggestions for changes.
Which is great.
Yeah. So that honesty has been there because we were close friends, and they've made quite the effort and so many contributions. They've taken that ownership. So, for example, we had one area in the layout. It was below the second level. There was some unused space, but it was being covered up by fascia. And a couple of the guys just, month after month, hey, we need to do something with this layout space. We need to do something with this unused, inefficient layout space. And so we got to talking about it, and we decided to put an industrial switching area in there, where you can sit down in a chair and switch, and it's fed from staging. And it's one of the best operating positions that we have. And people just love it. Great suggestion. I probably would have never thought of it myself, but they were honest about it and said, hey, we need to make this change. Here's an opportunity. And they bugged me about it, and we certainly agreed, and we all worked on it together, and it came out great. So,
yeah, it's like what you've got there, I think, is kind of like, it's like that club mentality, but it's not the politics of club, but it's the benefits of club. Right. It's like, you don't have to worry about everybody having a vote as to what's happening, but it's the community that gets to help, build the direction of the layout and help you along in those decisions. It's really cool.
And a big part of that was, as the owner, I approached it like a business plan. We, at least every year, I would talk to the guys. We'd get together and we'd talk about the accomplishments that we made in the previous year. We'd talk about visions and projects that we want to tackle next year, and those ideas came up. And it was really truly a team effort by the entire team, and it's just been a great experience.
So when did this process started? You said you moved in 2005, 2006, somewhere around there. When are you able to start to do a little bit of operating on this? When do you start to get to that point?
As soon as we could. Yeah. So we laid tracks. We laid the track, put the signaling system in, and I called them not beta sessions but alpha sessions. That's how raw it was. It was really raw, and it was important that we operated just to ensure things were operating properly, functioning well. Yeah. And we needed feedback from everybody. So one of the requirements, and to this day it's a requirement, that if you're operating here, the only thing I expect or ask in return is that you give me feedback about suggestions, things we need to do differently, things that aren't working. And so we started that early on, and bench work and track laying and electrical went in. And I suspect we were operating, I have to go back and check my notes, but probably within 2 years. Wow. That's how quickly things went up.
Wow.
Yeah. So we had, we were working twice a week. We were really knocking it out with the infrastructure, meaning, the bench work, the lighting, the valance, the carpet, ceiling tiles, everything. So we were really cranking hard to get the layout up and operating as early as we can. And I had a lot of frank feedback about how things were functioning when we operated. And we've been operating nonstop since then. So
I think those alpha and beta sessions are very important for all those reasons you said. And also it's like those mental victories too, right? Like it just keeps you inspired and keeps you going when you get to run, on it. Okay, cool. We got this section started. We're able to run some trains on it. It's starting to feel good. Now we can move to the next step and start adding more and adding more. If you wait for all that, obviously the benefit of, or the lack of benefit of being able to test things out and fix them as you go, but also you got to wait so long to get a little bit of satisfaction in being able to see a train on what you've been working on.
Yeah, and that was the tough part. I mean, we had 2 years of constant work sessions, and I'm not a very patient person anyway. So you know, but I knew that the end result to meet the goals would happen eventually. Yeah. So it was a tough couple of years of not being able to run trains, but we did it. And as track went in, of course, we did testing and things like that. But in terms of testing and operating early on, to look at the entire layout as a whole and how it functioned and operated, it was at least 2, maybe even 2.5 years. But there were some things we did in between, some testing and things like that, just to make sure signal system worked and track was powered, and we're getting feedback and detection and things like that. So, but it was a tough year, 2.5 years until we got things really up and running. So.
But things weren't being done in phases, because it sounds like you were just,
right.
All the signals and all that was all going in along with it. It wasn't like, okay, we'll build the whole thing, then we'll eventually add signals and detection. Right. It was all going in as that's being built.
Yeah, and that's because, I needed to get access to underneath the sub-road bed for wiring and so forth, and I didn't have the fascia, and it was easier to wire things before you put the fascia on, and even some scenery, base scenery. So there was a process there. Yeah. And because the layout was so large, that process took some time. But it was important to do those things and do them properly and correctly in the right order, just to ensure that we had some longevity with the layout in terms of not having any issues later on, using quality products and following the process and using good workmanship. That all took a little bit of time, a little bit of money up front, but it was well worth it in the long run. The layout runs beautifully with virtually no issues. And I'm confident that's because we took the time, did it right. And even though I was impatient, we weren't too impatient. We waited, and it was a good investment.
That's a tough discipline to have, especially when you're building something as exciting as this is. And you talk about, CTC and, the detection and the signaling all going in. It's clear to see as I've watched this video, your love for electronics. I mean, key lock control points, you got defect detectors, you've got switch operated fusees at a crossing. You're weighing cars at a grain mill with a working scale, and you've got an option to do a remote announcer to the other end of a yard, and just all these really wild interactive things that are just. So were these things that you had planned, or these things that started to come along as you were building them?
Both. I have a friend who has a company called Boulder Creek Engineering, who his name is Jim Ferentz. And Jim, after he retired, wanted to start this company, Model Railroad Electronics. So I would give all the ideas to Jim, and he would go build them, and I would integrate them into the layout and give him feedback. Yeah. So it was a two-way street, but that's part of the fidelity of prototype operations. The prototype does that, so we do too. So how do we accomplish that? Well, I need an electronics guru like Jim Ferentz to develop a product, and those turn into products that he could sell, and he did so successfly. So it was a joint effort on a lot of that. On a lot of those things that you talked about. But the CTC and that's been around forever, and the signaling and all that kind of good stuff is, and it's a passion of mine too. So Jim and I worked well together, and but the other electronics on the layout, I just really enjoyed, spending the time and doing it properly, and got a lot of satisfaction when things worked right after taking the time and the money to, get it installed. So
yeah, it's I love how you've let your imagination run wild enough, applied it to your layout. I mean, and then I didn't even mention some of the other things. I was scribbling notes as this video is going along. Loading coal cars, doing what you're doing in your intermodal yard, where you're sorting out. You're even putting containers on well cars, and then you've even got the video or the camera that you're using, like the CCTV camera for loading the coal cars, looking for trespassers. Unbelievable. I shouldn't spoil this for people. Watch this TSG Multimedia video. You're just going to be blown away at the stuff that this wild imagination, and so fun because it's real. It's just that reality stuff. Like you said, the fidelity kind of aspect to your layout is just absolutely amazing.
Yeah, it's a lot of that comes from the prototype. I mean, I was fortunate to get in a lot of the coal mines up in Powder River and watch them load coal, and I was in the control tower with the guy, and they're looking at cameras into the cars. So I thought to myself, Jesus, we need to do that. We can certainly get an inexpensive camera and a monitor and put it in the fascia and have a little policy about what to do.
Unbelievable.
And so we did that. And a lot of those other ideas I picked up from, again, traveling and seeing and operating in others' layouts, like the container, looking at the container numbers and finding the right equipment, the well cars, and to put that container in, a particular container. That stuff, a lot of that stuff came from other layouts. So I only steal from the best.
Yeah.
So, right. Yeah.
Well, that's what art is, right? It's like 80-90% of theft and 10, but no, I mean, you've applied it all. And, and another thing I have to mention, you're just a man after my own heart with the professionalism, the documentation, the organization you have is just, it's really first class. I mean, you look around the video, I mean, you've done a beautiful job, not only just building the layout, but the finish, how the room looks, how the signage on the fascia is just so clean, and you've got all your throttles are all lined up perfectly, and all of them have Fall River Division lanyards, and that is just stuff that really, like I said, after my own heart, because that's stuff I absolutely love to see, that high level of professionalism that you're putting on.
Yeah, that's probably part of my OCD, but I think we all probably have that as model railroaders. But, we spend a lot of time in our layouts, especially people that own them and build them. We spend a lot of time in the basement. So I think it's really important to have a comfortable space. Yeah. And one of the things that I've observed, and I truly believe in, is that if you have a nice, neat appearance, you take care of things are, presented well, I think operators and visitors respect that.
Yeah, for sure.
They operate slower. They're more careful. They don't damage things. And I think that really helps with that. And that was, again, one of the objectives was to have a very pleasant, comfortable environment so that operators and visitors have a similar experience. So,
well, you take it beyond the layout, even to your website, and we'll put the link in the show notes. And you've got all the documentation on there as well. I mean, it's obviously, you definitely can tell that you've made a living as a project manager and being able to document. But it's awesome. It's so much. I eat that stuff up. I really do. I really love that. I've been to other layouts too, and they do those really cool things. I picked up at Mike Armstrong's. He's got a timetable all printed out and very well done and very well professionally. And you've got this. It's the same. It's that same level of just first class presentation.
Well, I appreciate that, Ray. And I know the operators appreciate that as well. I do host a lot of guest operating sessions. In fact, we had a group last week from New York and New Jersey out, and next week we've got an invitational for people from all over the country. So the web page really helps them understand what they're getting into. So typically I'll send them a note saying, here's a link to the web page with the documentation so that you can become familiar with the jobs, maybe think about what you want to do when you're at the layout, and you understand some of the guidelines that we have. And so that all serves a good purpose, as well as kind of just being out there and, for show. So the web, in my opinion, the web page is a tool. And that's why I use it. So I get a lot of requests too. Where are your videos? Do you have a layout diagram? And I always point them right to the web page. And it's really been beneficial to help people understand what's going on here. So.
Well, it's really great that you share all that information, but you still seem to be paying it forward from the opportunities that you were given early on to be brought in and put a throttle in your hand and teach you, as they're doing the same for people that are coming to your layout as well, having that heart of the teacher kind of mentality as they come in to learn it.
Yeah, I've been very fortunate. People have brought me in. Even though I've made a lot of screw-ups, I've been invited back to a lot of places. And I appreciate that. I recognize that, and I'm just fortunate to be able to reciprocate to our community within both the operations community and just layout construction and layout owners in general. Typically, I get a lot of layout visitors. I'm in Colorado. A lot of people pass through, come out here. So in the summertime, I usually get I average probably one layout visit a week. People just coming through wanting to see the layout. I just had one a few days ago, and I'm certainly open to whoever wants to come over and see the layout. I try to have open houses. I have one coming up in October 21st, and I really believe in sharing with others. They've all shared with me, and I think this is part of our community, being open to each other and sharing. So many benefits.
As you share the layout with all these folks that come around, is there something that folks that come to visit notice that kind of surprises you?
I guess they're surprised with the detail based on, the size of the layout. It's a large layout. It's so detailed, and the environment is very pleasing. And I'm not sure if I'm surprised by that, but I get a lot of comments. I think a lot of layouts are detailed, maybe not to the size that I have, to the extent that I've done it, but I've had a lot of great help. So that's a big comment and a big lot of feedback I get about that, but I'm not too surprised about it. So.
Yeah. Well, you've definitely done a lot of work to make that presentation. Let's talk about operating real quick, because
Sure.
Even to manage 18 to 22 operators is what we say in the video. That's a pretty big crew. Tell us about like a typical operating night and how it kind of goes and organizing 18 to 22 operators.
Sure. Yeah, it's a lot of people. I've got a huge list that I draw from. People that have been here. I've been to their layouts. People that want to operate, and I've got well over 100 people on that list.
Wow!
And so, when I send the invitation out, there are people that get an invite to every session because they've either contributed to the layout or I operate at their place and we reciprocate. Yeah. Then there's other folks that come occasionally that I try to rotate. So that everybody gets a equal chance or a fair chance, you will, of operating every so often. And then I typically hold 1 or 2 slots for new people. I, get a lot of email. Hey, can I come over and operate? Can I, and so I typically, hold 1 or 2 slots for those people. And I send an email out to, the 24, 25 people, because I expect 2 or 3 aren't going to be able to attend.
Right.
And that's how I get 20, 21, 22 people. And I expect a response. It's kind of like hosting a dinner party. When you invite 20 people over to your house, I expect a response back. Yes, I can or I can't attend. Yeah. And that's fine. I understand, and I know people can't attend every session. That's fine. I just ask that you let me know so I can invite someone in their absence. Right. And share the share the experience with everybody. So I send that out. They respond back, and I put them on the list, and they show up on the date. We typically operate on Saturday, starting at around noon, and it's a 4-hour session. So we operate until 4:30, and then after the session, we go out and have a dinner. It's an optional dinner. You can certainly attend if you want. We typically get 12, 13, 14 people that participate in the dinner. It's at a local restaurant, and it's just a time for fellowship. And most often, a lot of discussion happens about the layout in the session. Sure. So it's a great opportunity for me to get a lot of candid feedback. So that's kind of nice. So that's generally how the session works. When we start the session, we do a crew call, and I have a seniority-based system. So if you've attended a session, you earn a point. If you've contributed some other way to the layout, you get some additional seniority points. And I have an application that keeps track of the jobs everybody's had and the seniority points that they have. And I generate a report before the session, and then we go tops down on that report. Most of it's based on the seniority. There's some randomness built in, but that's how we select the jobs. Occasionally, I'll go bottoms up from that list, or I'll do a total random draw just to kind of mix it up and give those people that typically are at the bottom of the list a better chance of a job that they want.
Okay.
And then I also have a rule that a person cannot take the same job more than 2 consecutive times, and that's how we build a skill.
Right.
So somebody's not capitalizing on the same job every time. People have an opportunity to take some of those better jobs, if you will. Yeah. And other people are taking jobs that they're not familiar with, and that's how we build skill over time.
Right.
So it works well. I mean, I'm not having to run around and help people and take care of issues, and that allows me the opportunity to operate on my own layout. So I typically take a job every session, and I'm a firm believer that every layout owner should be operating on their own layout. So even though I receive a lot of feedback and I ask for feedback, I probably don't always get it. So it's nice to take a job and to understand how it works and what's not working based on my own expectations and make those changes. So
some great advice. Always run your jobs. You create it and run it. And then what's also funny is that you run it and then you watch somebody else run it and they run it in a totally different way. Like, you're the one that designed the job and built it, but then you get somebody else in there and they just find a whole new way of looking at the thing. And it's pretty neat to see those kinds of things happen.
Yeah, I typically, I don't tell people how to do it. I tell them what to do. And how they accomplish that is up to them. And that's part of the fun of operating, is letting them figure it out and kind of finding their own way. And it's great when they get a sense of accomplishment because they've met the objective of the job. So that's good.
Yeah. You know what I'm sitting here thinking about? I'm like, how did Northern Colorado become such a hotbed for model railroading? Like 18 to 20, you got 100 people on the list. That's just absolutely, you're an amazing place. I mean, let alone all the other things that we know about that area. And, we got over in Greeley, got Michelle Kempema and the Colorado Model Railroad Museum. You've just got so much going on out there. It's just, how did that happen? Maybe there's no good answer for it, but how did how did everybody end up out there?
That's a good question. I have no idea. I feel very fortunate. I've visited I've visited a lot of areas of the country. Yeah. And I always felt that Northern Colorado had a lot to offer in terms of model railroads operation, museums. Yeah. Unfortunately, we lost Caboose Hobbies, but there's a new hobby shop coming online in Denver. So I think there's a lot of great things happening in Northern Colorado in terms of model railroading and prototype railroading as well.
Yeah. So, yeah, for sure. I mean, you got a lot of great things. I told you in the pre-show, I've made it out there once. I'm definitely going to have to make it out there again and see if I can sneak my way into an operating session over on the BNSF Fall River Division, because this is absolutely amazing what you've created. We're going to have you back because I've got so many other questions about operations and how you've built so many jobs and keep 18 to 22 operators busy, but we're running out of time here. But before we go, I just want to ask what's next for the BNSF Fall River Division?
Marching forward. There's a couple of industries I'd like to finish. I've got a C-mix cement facility I'd like to finish. A couple of large industries that I really would like to finish within the next 5 or 6 months. It's just been eating at me that they've been unfinished since the layout started. Yep. So I'll probably even shut down operations just to give myself a little bit more time to get some work on the layout done. So, yeah.
Well, it sounds like you'll have a lot of help in getting that back up and running, and getting those projects finished. You've got a great crew there, and just an outstanding layout. One of the best, I think, that's probably out there. It's absolutely amazing. Again, folks, TSG Multimedia has done an excellent job of putting it to video. Definitely, we'll check that video out. And then, John, thank you so much for joining me on Around the Layout and sharing your story.
Oh, thanks, Ray. It's been an absolute pleasure. So appreciate everything you've done, and especially with your podcast. I just love it. It's fantastic. Thanks.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. Learn more about today's show on our Facebook page, facebook.com/Around the Layout. Show your support by becoming an operating crew member at patreon.com/Around the Layout podcast. Past episodes and more can be found on our website, aroundthelayout.com. And send us your feedback, aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Thanks for hanging out with us around the layout.